Hello, and welcome to another fully live Friday episode of Hacking with Friends. My name is Cody Kinsey. I am a security researcher at Varonis, and today we have a special guest, Alex Lin, on today to talk about some security news and go over some developments from some of what we talked about last week. Alex, thank you for joining us today.
Pleasure to be here.
So last week we talked a lot about Apple, and this week we're going to dive in and talk about another topic which Apple is involved in. So also just want to give a shout out to Zam. He helped provide a lot of the news that we're going to be covering on the stream. So Zam, thank you very much for sending all that in because some of these I just frankly had missed. So let's go ahead and get started with basically the iPhone search controversy, which Alex, can you explain a little bit about what you know of the iPhone and how it was going to start searching users' content?
Yeah, so they planned to implement a feature that would basically on the client side of how things are handled, detect and go through various photos on apps like I think iMessage or personal photos, stuff like that, and detect for child abuse correlated things, and basically notify Apple if such material was detected on their device before notifying Apple of people having this content.
Right, and the controversy here is they call it like a child safety feature, but it's kind of really more like a everybody searchy feature. It's currently justified because the content that's being searched for is, like child abuse imagery. However, this could very easily be repurposed to look for any kind of content. It really is designed to be something that sits on the other end of an encrypted channel and scans it in order to identify things that are bad. And there's lots of other countries that do that. Like China, for example, likes to sit and look for keywords that might be linked to political dissent or other things that they want to limit the ability of other people to access. So this means that the system that's being built alarmed a lot of security researchers because of how easily it could be repurposed to act like the surveillance systems of other countries that are really interested in surveillance. So if you buy an iPhone and their motto is what stays on your iPhone, what's on your iPhone stays on your iPhone, or like privacy, that's great until they build an algorithm that's going to go through and proactively basically report to somebody other than you. So that's why a lot of people were upset by this, not because they have anything to hide, it's because they can see that this is a slippery slope, and by creating this mechanism it's almost a sure thing that somebody is going to try to abuse it, and that could be a legal challenge that tries to in secret force Apple to use this mechanism to do something in the name of counterterrorism, but maybe it's not vetted very well. This is the kind of thing that could be easily abused, and that's really why so many people came out against it. So if we switch over to my screen, you can see one of the tweets that was put out about this by Edward Snowden was, every iPhone will search itself for whatever Apple wants, or for whatever Apple is directed to want. So that could be, a legal challenge or somebody telling Apple in secret that you have to comply with this, otherwise you either need to shut down or some other terrible thing happens. They're inventing a world in which every product you purchase owes its highest loyalty to somebody other than its owner. And that really is the core of what a lot of people were upset about this. If you buy a device, you don't expect it to be rifling through your files and reporting back to somebody else unless you explicitly consent to that. And this kind of goes into, if you spend $1,000 on a phone, are you renting that phone from the manufacturer, or do you actually own it? And here is a case where this device is designed to work in a way that basically is searching you. It could lead to criminal prosecution, or it could lead to you being uniquely identified and that information passed along to someone who you did not consent to. So that's why so many people were so upset about this, and Apple has now reacted. So they've decided that after the absolute firestorm of people maybe not wanting a surveillance system continuously running on their device, they actually are going to take a look and see on this one. So there have been a lot of people really upset about this. It's also the process of collisions has been raised multiple times. Alex, can you explain what a hash collision is?
Yeah, it's when a hash of two unique or two different objects or images ends up returning the same hash value. So this is problematic if they're looking for very specific material, in this case like child abuse material, and if someone had another completely uncorrelated image that when hashed returns the same hash as something that a child abuse image would also return.
Right, and so the amount of false positives that the system would generate just because of the ability to generate hash collisions is also of a concern here for more technical people, because there were some examples already of like an image of a dog and then an image of just like scary, weird mist that had the exact same hash value. So when you're using a system that's called a perceptual hash, a perceptual hash is designed to basically make it so that if you have an image that's been cropped, rotated, resized, changed, you'll still be able to identify that image even if a little bit changes. So you can't use a traditional hash where it just takes the file and then it hashes it, because if that image was just slightly, like degraded a little bit by a download or something, a single piece of information being changed about that image would suddenly totally change the hash value. So in Apple's quest to be able to identify a broad amount of the type of material they're looking for, they've also opened the door to lots and lots of false positives. And that concerned a lot of people as well, because then you have this like, oversight, secret oversight like group that I guess at Apple is going to be looking to see if you're really a guilty person or not. And then that private person is going to decide whether or not to turn the information over to the police. It's just so weird to have this extra cog in the criminal justice system that's just a private company spying on their users and passing along anyone who's too bad to the authorities. A lot of people didn't like it. So Apple, in their official statement, update. Previously we announced plans for features intended to help protect children, but also search everybody else. And it turns out people didn't like that. So based on feedback from customers, advocacy groups, researchers, that's me, and others, we have decided to take additional time over the coming months to collect input and make improvements before releasing these critically important, like they're kind of like still saying like, we're still gonna do it. But they are acknowledging that like everybody hates this. And I don't, I use a Mac because it was given to me. I don't have an iPhone, so this doesn't affect me a lot, but my macOS computer would start scanning for stuff that I have no ability to know what it's scanning for, who it's reporting back to. This is all just kind of on Apple's word. So, this is definitely creepy, and I'm glad that Apple has decided to delay the release of this, although it looks like the best we're going to get is maybe like a watered down version or something that's like a little less useful for the people who want it, but also not really the same as just scrapping this idea. So we'll see what comes out of this. I feel like based on the amount of negative feedback they got from this, from people who don't want their device constantly searching them for something that could be changed at any moment, this is welcome news. So we'll have to sit and see exactly what Apple does in the future. Okay, so the next story is purely because Zam is so upset about this. Autodesk was apparently targeted by the SolarWinds hackers, and this is something that was not really disclosed for a very long time. Now, a lot of important people use Autodesk, and the problem with not knowing that it was breached by, a nation state with lots of resources and zero-day vulnerabilities is that maybe they didn't do so great of a job of finding everything the bad guys did. I don't know. But it really would have been very helpful for everybody who uses this product to be able to know about this, maybe sometime within like the last 9 months. Any of those months would have been a good time. So this was apparently detected back then, and it's kind of a bad look to have like such a well-known platform like breach like this, and then this was, again, on December 13th that this happened. So, apparently, according to them, they didn't observe the malicious actors doing anything else. That could just be because they didn't see it, but who knows? But they say that they think that, they probably just were selected for second stage exploitation, because like the threat actors were just, made a mistake. Whoops. So that's great. That's great news for everybody who uses any sort of product by Autodesk. But I mean, again, there's no indication that there was an actual compromise beyond what they're saying here. It's just extremely poor taste to wait 9 months to tell your customers that something happened, especially when it involves a group as kind of big and thorny as the group behind this. And the SolarWinds hack was a big deal. So a lot of companies came forward when that happened, and we're only now kind of realizing that there was other companies that were also breached who chose not to come forward for the good of, I don't know. But, I mean, I don't think that the stock prices of these other companies even got that bad after this, because it just bounced back up. But anyway, I'm not even gonna. Disclosure is one of those things where you you don't know the circumstance of the other company, so who really knows in this case? All I know is that ZAM is furious because using a product like this, it really, really sucks to know that there might have been an issue so long ago, and just knowing that they could have told you unless there was a really compelling reason, which there doesn't really seem to be. And also the press release on this was kind of vague. So this was only really noticed because somebody went through a filing that they did, noticed that, and then it kind of became a bigger story. So yikes. All right, so again, we have no reason to believe that there was any further compromise on what they're saying here. It's just a little unusual that they waited such a long time to reveal this. Alex, was there a question in the chat?
Yeah, someone asked about the hash collisions. So they said, wouldn't they be using hashes that have no known collisions?
Nope. So they apparently, going back to the Apple thing, they apparently picked a hash that has known collisions, and they just decided that the amount of false positive was acceptable. And they basically are saying, like, false positives are built in the system, humans will verify this. So presumably there's just, some guy in a room just looking at random like pictures that are not what you think they are, and being like, no, this guy's fine, no, this guy's fine. That looks a little no. It's hard to say if there are too many collisions. What is actually child abuse imagery, if it's like something that's kind of not clear, or there's a lot of things that could be added to this list that become difficult to know when it's a collision, or it just becomes a very murky area when you have a software tool that's supposed to create a unique signature, but it actually doesn't. Because it becomes misleading when it's used as evidence or it's used as an investigation tactic if there's the possibility of it actually pinging on something that is not the real thing. So that's what's the problem with the hashing. And if you want to look more into it, you can take a look at some of the research that's been done on the perceptual hashes. It's called NeuroHash, I believe, that Apple's using. Really, really interesting stuff. And one story that we covered earlier was a group had developed a hashing system very, very similar to what Apple is using here, and they concluded that it was too dangerous to use. They basically advocated against the use of the thing that they had created because they saw that it had too many flaws that could be abused. So let's talk about Bluetooth devices. So Bluetooth devices are pretty ubiquitous, and can you name a Bluetooth microcontroller that we work with all the time?
The ESP32, which is one of my favorite microcontrollers.
Right, so where would you find an ESP32 maybe in the wild?
Maybe in my hand. Actually, no, this is an ESP8266, but close. You could pick them up at, where would I buy one? You could probably find some.
Where would you find them embedded?
Oh, lots of IoT devices actually include them. So you could find them in smart light bulbs, various IoT products that you could probably find on the
smart cameras. Yeah, lots of different things that people rely on because these IoT devices are put in increasingly critical places. And also this vulnerability doesn't just affect IoT devices, it also affects some Android phones. So what happened here is there's actually a series of flaws in the Bluetooth stack, and this is across many different manufacturers, that can cause some really, really serious problems. One of the flaws is able to basically inject arbitrary code into the chip if it's able to crash it. And the second is able to basically silence the chip so it can no longer use Bluetooth. Obviously, if that's the only way you have to communicate with an IoT device, then breaking its Bluetooth functionality is a really, really serious problem. And because all of these vulnerabilities are spread across so many different devices, this is a really serious one, and also one that's super, super interesting. So one thing to note is all these vulnerabilities can be triggered without any previous pairing or authentication, meaning if there's a vulnerable device in the area, you can proceed to attack it, provided their Bluetooth is on, without needing to be paired or having any sort of special relationship with the device you are attacking. And this also means that you can now, with this flaw, deauthenticate Bluetooth devices, meaning you can kick Bluetooth I think they're called slaves in Bluetooth. It's weird. They're not clients, they're slaves. But you can kick a Bluetooth slave away from its whatever by using one of these flaws, and effectively replicate some of the attacks you can do with Wi-Fi, which is really, really weird, but really cool. So I don't think that there's a proof of concept available at the moment, but there are some CVEs if you want to check this out. You can see, again, the ESP32 system on chip is very, very commonly used. And one of the things you can do is inject arbitrary code which erases its NVRAM data. So there's lots of bad things you can do to Bluetooth speakers, headphones, and again, these also include things like cameras and other things that are very, very critical. So Espressif devices, and there are some other manufacturers who have started releasing patches for this. So if you have one of these devices and you're able to update them, that's great. But unfortunately, a lot of these devices, because they're embedded, are not going to be updated for a very long time. So, oh, look at that. There's a proof of concept tools that can be used by vendors to replicate the vulnerabilities and validate against. Okay, so it looks like this proof of concept doesn't actually attack, but it does check to see if anything is vulnerable. And I am curious about it, and now I want to try to run this. Maybe as a, no, I don't want that. Oh, I have to request it. Okay, well, cool. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and request this later, and then maybe we can actually go ahead and like run this for you guys, and you can see what it looks like. So, all right, moving on to the next topic, we have a very interesting demonstration that basically shows a vulnerability in rolling codes. So this is something, do you know what a rolling code is?
Not entirely, but I think the premise is that you can append like bits to the end of each other or something like that in order to get like a whole bunch of different codes in the same sequence when replaying something. So you can explain it better probably.
Yeah, so if you have something like a Bluetooth, or let's just say like a radio dongle for like your garage or your car or something like that, that is a short range radio frequency opener, basically for like your car or whatever else, like it needs to be able to securely communicate a code to the vehicle that is not going to be able to be intercepted and used to open the car. So if your like key fob only put out a single code every time you pressed it, someone could just sit there and intercept it and then be able to figure out what it was and replay that in order to open up your car. And that would obviously be a bad thing. So instead, manufacturers a while ago started switching to something called a rolling code. So a rolling code means that every time you press the key fob, it's generating a valid, but only valid one time code. And the car is basically listening for these codes and will only accept a code one time that's generated by the key. So if you click the key 3 times, it should generate 3 rolling codes, and all those codes would be valid to open the door. But if I intercepted all 3 of those codes and tried to play them back later, the car wouldn't open because it had already accepted those codes. And these codes are supposed to be pseudo-random, so they're supposed to be like look random, but they're supposed to be derived by some sort of secret key or whatever that the car will validate. That's the way it's supposed to work, but it looks like that might not be the way it actually works. So what was discovered here was that there is a vulnerability in the way that Honda in these cars, which apparently go back pretty far, I think it was like back to 2009 all the way up to the current model, or maybe 2020 model, only flip a couple bits in order to create their rolling code. And you can just do this yourself on a code that's been captured in order to create a valid code that will open the car. So that is not good. It's basically supposed to be a really long like code that gets changed or whatever, but it looks like instead in this case they've been using one that doesn't actually require very much cryptography. So you can see the tweet here shows a little bit about what this is, but really this is a CVE that is related to this. And at the moment, it's undergoing reanalysis, which is something that I don't often see. So this is a little bit unusual. We'll have to kind of sit and see like exactly what happens with this, because the severity and everything else for this might change. But it seems to say that the remote keyless system on Hondas sends the same RF signal for each door to open request, which might allow a replay attack. And replay attacks are the worst possible scenario in a rolling code. It means you found a way to take a code that should not be valid anymore and use it to open the door. So there have been some other attacks against rolling codes. Like, can you think of a way that you might be able to open a door that used a rolling code if you had physical access to the key for a while?
Probably by cloning someone's like RFID thing or something like that. I'm not sure.
So one very tricky way that you can do this, or that's I think Sammy Kamkar showed how to do this.
The Open Sesame attack?
I don't know what that is.
The garage door?
Perhaps. Do you know? Care to explain?
I don't know a whole lot about it, but he found an exploit on this very old, like, sort of gaming console that uses RF to communicate between each other. It was sort of like a handheld, like, chat thing, but he found a way to exploit that tool in order to open, like, various garage doors on the same frequency.
No, it's not that one.
Dang.
So in this one, we use a signal cloner. And so just something that can read and then play back arbitrary radio signals, nothing special here, and tinfoil. That's the secret. So what we do is we take the key and then we wrap it in tinfoil so that the car can't hear it. Basically, we jam the signal so that the car can't hear it. And then we click the button a bunch of times and record all the rolling codes. Now, because the car hasn't heard these rolling codes before, it should be able to accept them. Which means if we get back to the car and use these codes, we should have as many valid codes as we pressed to try to open up the car. And of course, if a car gets a little bit smarter and starts using sequential codes, then it shouldn't go back and accept a code that was generated before one of the ones that it was last used to open. But a lot of cars don't check this. So that kind of vulnerability means that you can just take the key a very far distance away from the car, and if you copy that code, then it should theoretically be able to open the car door because the car hasn't heard it yet. So it doesn't know that it can't use that code anymore. And it just knows that that code's valid. So there's a couple different ways to attack this sort of system. This is super interesting though. So if you have a Honda that has keyless entry, mine does not, very sadly, please try this. Because there's a proof of concept. It would be really interesting to see, if this is actually valid and how to trigger it. So unfortunately, I can't try this because my Honda does not have keyless entry, but if yours does, then please give this a try and let us know if it works. Okay, so last week we mentioned the Razer issue. Now, can you maybe bring people up to speed on what that was in general?
Yeah, so certain Razer devices like keyboards and mice and things like that require software that's apparently proprietary to Razer, or like certain drivers that are necessary in order to basically just run their hardware. So when you would plug in some of these devices to Windows computers, there was actually, it requires a certain level of privilege in order to access these drivers that basically gives you administration privileges when plugging these devices in. So obviously this exploit is pretty scary because just plugging in like a certain type of mouse or keyboard gives you admin privileges that you're not supposed to have.
Right, and of course the requirement here is that you actually have like a Razer mouse or keyboard ready to go and to plug into someone's computer and see if it gives you administration privileges. But what if you just had an Android phone? So it turns out if you have root on an Android phone, you can use it as a, not as a Razer keyboard or as a Razer mouse, but you can make it identify as one when it plugs in and basically get the same privilege that you would from one of those devices, which is really, really cool. So this proof of concept, which I have not tried because I do not have a rooted Android phone, but does look really awesome, would allow you to be able to use your Android phone as a USB gadget, and provided you are identifying it as a Razer device, this would trigger the same exploit path that you could use if you had a physical one. So this is really cool. If you want to check it out, make sure to go on GitHub and look at the USB gadget-tool, which I'm sure Alex can drop a link in the chat for.
Absolutely.
And it's just exciting to see that, there are some proof of concepts that are being generated off of the original one, which was just, using a Razer keyboard or mouse. Now it seems like you can use any Android device that's rooted. So that's really cool for anybody who wants to try this out themselves and maybe wants a more flexible tool to be able to do this. Although I feel like there's probably some other stuff that could be done with like microcontrollers on this too. But yeah, anyway, very, very cool. And a continuation on the vulnerability that we talked about last week.
That's really
Thank you
cool.
for summarizing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so have you seen these sorts of algorithms that are able to take an image and reverse it from static statistically in order to create additional detail from an image that lacked it to begin with? So we have here a low resolution image that basically is being put through some sort of machine learning thing that learns how to take the image, make it into pure noise, and then figures out the things that change from it becoming the image to pure noise to bring it back, basically, and try to take even more noise and generate it into an image. It's really weird. It's really weird. But
I have seen a one-way where it's just like grainy to high resolution, or even like turning things that are blurred back into like regular text or stuff like that. But this is interesting.
it's really cool. So you can see some of the visualizations they've done here. And they also compare it against some other methods of kind of creating this data from something where it doesn't exist. So here's a little cheeseburger, here's a little streetcar. You can see it being, and they're basically like upscaling it, but they're statistically adding data that doesn't exist here.
That's
like
cool.
this image is too low resolution to actually be upscaled to this reliably. All this detail is being created by like a machine learning process that is taking this and literally just from statistics and putting it back together. So that gave rise to the immediate concern that this actually might be used for law enforcement. So if somebody
Oh no.
if somebody were to start thinking, hey, this is a great way to take a blurry photo of someone or a low resolution photo of someone and enhance it dramatically, it's really important to notice that they're adding information that is not really there. They're not restoring data. They're actually filling in information that's missing with a best guess. And you have no idea how accurate that best guess is. The computer's just trying to do its job the way it was told to do. It's not trying to fight crime. It's just trying to, like fill in data that's missing in a way that looks realistic. And the problem here is that also it can take an image that's like a 90% match for thousands of people. Basically create an image that's 90% match for thousands of people because it's just taking the safest path here to create the data in a plausible way. So if this were, for example, being used to start enhancing images for facial recognition, the probability that you would be adding fake information or not like information that's not real there in order to fill out the image that doesn't have all the data is extremely high. And the possibility that you misidentify someone or, again, create an image that's a match for lots of different people unintentionally is also extremely high. So if law enforcement starts using this technology, the problem is they don't really understand where the data is coming from. They're like, oh, look, it's restoring the data, but it's not. It's completely fabricating data. And it's doing it in a way that looks really good. But, in some of these examples, like, yeah, okay, like some of these images look really, some of these images look really good, but that's not what the original picture looked like. There were, things that were added, things that were removed in order to try to make it look accurate. And the algorithm does a really good job, but this is not an actual reconstruction of the image. This is an approximation of what the algorithm thinks the image looked like. And just because it's filling in that guess really well doesn't make it more accurate. So, that's one thing that I really need to stress here. Like all this detail, like all these little like nuances and stuff, like those are all things that are like suggested maybe by the data here, but it's not really there. And it's kind of a freaky concept for people that are like seeing this and thinking that it actually is restoring a photo. It's just figuring out what we expect the photo to look like and then helping us get there so that we're like, oh, wow, you're so good at this, computer, but we don't really know if this is accurate. So, there are comparisons between the original image and this image that look pretty good. But again, like you cannot rely on this for like law enforcement and you cannot rely on this to be 100% accurate because it is just making stuff up. So really interesting kind of view into the way that this technology that looks miraculous can unintentionally be adopted into like law enforcement or other parts of our society without really knowing what's happening in the background. In this case, yeah, like data is being added to an image to make it look more high resolution, but that data might never have been there. So also, we talked a little bit about Clearview last time, and here's a little bit of an update. The ACLU has reported that their lawsuit against Clearview AI and their methods of just scraping everyone's social media photos against the terms of use of many, many different platforms and against the consent of many users who do not want to be included in this can continue. So I'm really hopeful that there will be some sort of settlement for all the people, I don't know, like in California, now that we have like that law whose data is being processed by this company without their permission, like GDPR, I feel like also might be a thing that comes back to bite this company. So it would be interesting to see exactly how this lawsuit proceeds because this company, again, if you don't know them, they have been taking all of your social media pictures for the last however many years and combining them into a database that they then sell to military and law enforcement to make grainy or blurry or out of focus images of you more recognizable by police and military. Super fun. So if you want that drone in the sky to be able to recognize you a little bit better by slurping down all of your Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter photos, then great. But if you don't, then this lawsuit might be of particular interest to you. Okay, so what do you know about the Conti ransomware?
I've heard nothing of it so far.
So this is a strain of ransomware that is using a new business model that basically focuses on bringing low-skilled actors into the fold as both patsies and enablers. So if you were to write some sophisticated ransomware, then one of the things that you could do if you were, I don't know, a big time crime organization or like a country that wanted to make it look like you weren't the ones responsible, is you could create a playbook for other actors to actually use the thing that you wrote and receive a profit while you also get a cut. So if you're able to basically provide the infrastructure necessary to launch an attack and then collect payment, you can just kick back and just get affiliate affiliate revenue basically from this thing happening because other people are willing to take on the risk, often maybe dumber people who have less to lose. So the way that this ransomware was kind of like being distributed was actually like the way that I don't know, like a Burger King or a Wendy's operates. It's like somebody came up with the main idea and started franchising it out to affiliates, and they would provide them with a handbook that was like kind of like null byte. It was just like a bunch of like guides also on how to
deploy this,
on like how to do a scan, how to use Metasploit, and some of the things that they were also using or like recommending their lower skilled people, their affiliates to use were like Armitage.
Oh, nice.
Do you know Armitage?
Isn't that GUI-based thing for like DDoS attacks? I think?
No, that's low orbit ion
okay,
cannon.
Never mind.
So
I've heard of it,
Armitage, you should recognize because it's like one of the only built-in tools on Kali that has like an anime icon. And it is a GUI, but it's a GUI for using Metasploit to find and attack targets. And it's typically not used by high-skilled actors. I'll just say that because it's like extremely apt. It's like point and click. It's like really, really easy once you learn a little bit about what you're doing. So yeah, they're talking about how to use all these different commercial tools like Cobalt Strike and other things to be able, Armitage, to be able to, once you get in, establish persistence and expand the attack. So yeah, it was just interesting to see all the educational tools that they included for the affiliates. So like, all right, you rascals, these are the tools you're going to need.
It's pretty interesting.
They show Mimikatz, Kerber roasting, router scanning, all these different techniques for making a breach worse, basically, by looking for other vulnerabilities and escalating their privileges. So they made apparently a lot of money on this. These were distributed in zip archives, and recently, I guess, some members of the gang who became disgruntled have been leaking this, so that's why we get some insight into the way that these sorts of organizations make money. It's just fascinating to think that like the original actors behind this, whoever they were, just went ahead and shot this out to people that didn't care about getting caught, and then made a bunch of money off of the backs of people who didn't know enough to write the ransomware, but knew barely enough to deploy it and profit off of it. So using criminal activity as a way of generating money and leading attention away from the people who are responsible for this sort of thing is a tactic that nation states and other people use pretty often to be able to raise money, wreak havoc, or blame somebody else for activity that they in fact are doing. So I'm not pointing any fingers here, but it just seems like it takes a lot of resources to put together all of this. And yeah, like there's a couple of nation states that in particular have a long history of using criminal elements and allowing them to operate within their country in order to create kind of a smokescreen between like offensive cyber operations. So I wouldn't really be that surprised if this was a case of something similar. But then again, criminal organizations can be smart if they are making money. So maybe this is just an example of organized crime as well. Who knows? All right, so do you know what Atlassian Confluence is?
No, but are they affiliated with the company that also took over like Trello?
Yes, they are.
Oh, no way. I don't like them.
Yeah. Yeah, so Confluence is basically a fancy wiki for businesses. And now the U.S. Cybersecurity Alert, Twitter is going off telling everybody that they need to patch this, and it cannot wait until after the weekend, meaning it's very likely that exploitation of this is going to ramp up and get really crazy over the weekend, because guess what? Everybody's going to be off, and Monday's off too. So these are the days that threat actors typically pick in order to go off and start attacking businesses, because they know it's going to take longer for incident response. They know that people are going to be on vacation and less likely to be able to respond quickly. So this alert is pretty serious. It's just very funny to me that almost every reply is, "Can you please explain to the marketing director how this makes us money?"
Nice.
So yeah, ironically, I believe that yes, a lot of businesses are going to be like, this is not the most important thing for us to be doing on a Friday. Let's just see what happens, and they're going to roll the dice, because like it doesn't make money, and spending the extra money on maybe incident response, or like pre-incident response, like getting things battened down, making sure that everything is ready for an incident if it were to happen, is probably not the way most people want to be spending their Fridays. But based on this warning by US Cybercom, it might be the best use of your time after all. So if you do use this product, then please make sure you update it. And if you have an urge to whoever is in charge about this, then yeah, you might let them know that the US Cybercom is now saying that it is a target that is likely to be exploited before the end of the weekend. Yikes. Hey, Alex, this one's you.
Whoa, no way.
Yeah, so I like
I'm
to
famous.
shout out resources that are really good. And this is probably one of my favorite episodes that Alex has done on Hak5 so far. So we talked a little bit about our war flying drone and how cool it was to strap an ESP8266, an SD card reader, I think a LiPo battery charger, and then a GPS to a drone and fly it around a park and be able to identify the exact location of where a target network was. It was super cool. I felt like a nation state conducting aerial surveillance. It was very awesome. But the most important part of this is when the drone comes back, taking the data that we captured and making sense of it. So Alex provided a really, really great beginner guide on taking war driving data and visualizing it on a map, including writing filters so we can identify a particular network we might be looking for. So if you guys want to check this out, it's on my Twitter. You can also, of course, go to, oh no, I just want to see this on YouTube. You can also go to YouTube on Hak5 and see visualizing war driving data in a Python notebook with pandas and Folium. This video is great, and I'm going to I took it away. Okay, There we go. Everybody else upvote this one too. But yeah, so this is a great resource, and I think that it's one of my favorites so far. So
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for doing that.
Of course.
All right, so this has been a long time coming, but it's just worth mentioning that single-factor authentication is now officially on the list of bad practices, according to the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So what does this mean?
That would be just like a one-sided form of authentication. So I think like just using a password instead of like multiple different forms of verifying your authenticity when like logging into something.
Exactly. And the problem is here, if you use a single password to log into your account, then you are one phishing attack or one bad password generator or one like reused password away from having that account be breached. And often people are not careful enough with their passwords. Sometimes I guess they're just not like creative enough with their passwords. And as a result, there are a lot of cases where, a password gets leaked, they get tricked in a phishing email. There's lots of ways this can happen. But if I steal your password and you use a hardware-based token to log in, I have nothing. I really, really have nothing. It does not do me any good to try to get into your account if you have a hardware token or if you have a second factor of authentication. Now, if you're using like SMS as your authentication method, I've got options. So, and I can still, if it's a targeted attack, go after you in a way that it would be not as hard as like a hardware token, but you can now use your smartphone, you can use a security key. There's lots of different options for adding a second factor, and I highly recommend them because frankly, if you're not using two-factor authentication, then you're making it extremely likely that someone is going to be able to get into your account because they only need to trick you once in order to get your password, and after that, it might not be possible for that system to differentiate you from an attacker. So really try to make sure any account you have that doesn't use 2FA is either locked down with a very secure password, or as soon as it's available for that account, migrate over to that. Because I don't necessarily recommend SMS-based authentication, but it's certainly a lot better than having nothing. So if that's the best you can do for now, SMS verification is better than nothing. If you can do a hardware token, or if you can do a smartphone, like using an authenticator app, then that's even better, because it means that person would have to get their hands on your actual device in order to log into your account, which we saw in a Mr. Robot scene, which was actually kind of cool. But and he actually kind of got caught doing that. So if Mr. Robot gets caught doing this, then you can assume that some idiot trying to get into your account is probably not going to do as good of a job. So yeah. I fully agree with adding single-factor authentication to a list of bad practices. I don't know why organizations that have important data are still using a single password based on all the things we've seen recently with somebody breaking in and all the options that are out there for just like getting an SMS code. So yeah, you should seriously side-eye any important service that only uses a single password to log you in at this point. It's just it's a little annoying to log in with extra authentication, but we're past the point that actually provides you real security. Okay, so we've got some problems with OpenSSL. Do you know what OpenSSL is?
Yeah, I think it's like a platform of tools for like creating SSL certificates or something. I'm not too familiar with it.
Yeah, so I don't know a ton about this particular vulnerability. I just know that it creates a high severity buffer overflow, and this affects servers that it's running on. So there's two different vulnerabilities. One of them has a score of 7.5, that's the more severe one, and the second one is 4.4. One of them is a buffer overflow, and the second, buffer overrun processing strings. And this one's kind of interesting because it basically, the kind of core problem here is the way that this handles strings. And at a certain point, it's possible in the second vulnerability to append something that basically doesn't null terminate. And then because it's going to keep reading until it finds a termination, you can attach all this arbitrary stuff that will proceed to read and execute, which you should not be able to do. So the second one is just, again, because of the way that this is handling strings. I think the first one has something to do with that as well. Again, if you're super interested in this, you can dig a little bit further into it. But yes, this is something that is definitely worth updating over just because of the buffer overflow. That one is pretty severe. But you can take a look at these vulnerabilities, which are CVE 2021-3711 and CVE 2021-3712, if you want to learn more information on them. But yeah, this is definitely something worth checking out if you need to update this. Alex, you want to talk about this one?
What is this? Ooh, flexible PCB assemblies.
So Alex and I have been talking about making PCB art for a while, and this one definitely caught our eye.
So it looks like, are they using actual flexible PCBs, or is this an assembly of rigid ones attached with hinges?
Hinges.
Oh, interesting. So it looks like the actual mechanical things that are used to hold these together are being used as electrical contacts in order to pass both signals to control the lights and also power for them. I guess a better alternative would just to be to use like an entire flexible PCB that would wrap all the way around, but this is still a cool proof of concept.
Yeah, so we've been looking for cool ideas and interesting proof of concepts for like jewelry ideas, because it's fun to be able to make things that are purely artistic and use the environment to create some randomness or interaction with the user. And we've been looking around, and this was something that was just immediately super interesting. Now, does this work super well? No, there's lots of flaws with this project. In particular, when you flex this, the hinges are not supposed to be used as electrical contacts. They just happen to be electrically conductive. So it causes lots of glitches in the signal, and it ends up not really looking very clean once it's fully like connected and trying to work. That being said, the way that this has been put together is absolutely super cool. There's some acrylic here, there's some hot glue to create the diffusion in the neopixels, and the end result is it just looks so cool. So, Alex and I are inspired by this. We're like really interested in doing something maybe similar to this, but if you have any favorite PCB art or jewelry, especially anything like this, please let us know. Like, this is such cool stuff, and we'd love to be able to make some things like this as well. Maybe as like little prizes for hacking games or something like that, or just as its own kind of standalone thing. So if you have any, I don't know, just like jewelry PCB projects you think are super cool, this one kind of blew our minds, and I love to show off stuff like this. So if anybody else is inspired by PCB art or jewelry, then this is something for you. All right, moving right along. So again, I'd like to point out some resources, and this is one that a lot of people have shown me. Harvard actually puts their computer science classes online for free. So if you want to be able to stick with these classes and kind of see them as they roll out, then they're coming out live September 1st to November 15th. So they're happening now. So if you're interested in computer science, if you want a really good course to get started with, then it's really great that Harvard University puts these online, and I definitely recommend people check them out because it's absolutely worth it. Okay, barely want to mention this one. Our friend Catherine Spears, who we actually met at my very first DEF CON, is going after Google for being retaliated against when she was terminated after providing a pop-up that advised Google employees of their labor rights when visiting a labor, I guess I would call them a specialty firm that specializes in making sure employees don't unionize. Now, Catherine's kind of a labor activist and was employed at Google to do this. And then as soon as this was raised, it caused a huge firestorm and she was fired and arguably retaliated against. And some poor Googler in this lawsuit had to go through her time post and find just lots of memes, lots of gay memes. Lots and lots and lots of gay memes, and one meme that they could use, which is a picture of Goofy saying, "I'll effing do it again," and that's it. So this is a case that is making a lot of Googlers very uncomfortable because it has to deal with labor rights, and it also has to deal with retaliation at Google. So if you're a Googler, if you're interested in this, definitely keep your eye on this case because some really ridiculous stuff is coming out. But this this Goofy meme being entered into evidence was probably the most ridiculous and funny thing I've seen so far. And just want to shout out Catherine Spears, who's awesome, and yeah. Okay, so going back to employee labor stuff, Apple apparently has banned employees from creating a Slack channel that discusses pay equity. And the official statement was saying that they didn't think that it was work appropriate or something, but in their, I think it's their specific terms that go over pay equity and like openness and transparency, they specifically talk about pay equity as being something that they're allowed to talk about and like something that's important to them. So this is kind of an ironic move from a company that's supposedly very focused on making sure there's pay equity when there's also fun dogs, gaming, buy nothing new, fun cats, and dad jokes are all channels that are perfectly allowed on the official Slack of this company. So yeah, it's just interesting to see what kinds of conversations are allowed at some of these big tech companies and which kinds of conversations are not allowed. And pay equity seems like one that would, at a fairly, at a company that says that they're into pay equity, that would be okay to talk about. But it's worth mentioning that apparently it's not. So have you seen what Adafruit is doing on TikTok?
No, I haven't actually.
It's actually great. So I like, again, to shout out some really good resources. And I like Collin's Lab, which I've been seeing more and more on TikTok. I know it's also on YouTube.
I see them on YouTube, yeah.
Yeah, on YouTube as well. But I think it translates well over to TikTok because they're short, they're informative. And this one's talking about using photo transistors. I've used photoresistors before for lots of different projects. And getting these kind of little one-off guides from Adafruit on how to start using a component that maybe I haven't used before is really cool and useful. So if you haven't subscribed to them, Adafruit's making a lot of really good content, and I like Collin's Lab a lot.
That's great.
Because I learned how to use electronic components that I have lying around and I just never really thought of. And another shout out to Adafruit. They also have some good write-ups. So in this case, I've been using the microcontroller that's running, or the sensor that's running off into the sunset, and they kind of go over the way to use some of the newer chips that are available to do the same thing, provide better performance, and kind of give you some more information on why people are switching from one over to the other. Again, if you're a hardware person and you want to stay up with things and you want to learn, hey, is there a better alternative out there and how would I use it, then this is a great way to do so. Adafruit puts out lots of great tools, and Alex and I have already been experimenting with some of the things they've put together to work with their own ecosystem that they've open sourced to make available to the community. Some of these things involve being able to connect to or even flash ESP8266 and ESP32 microcontrollers from a web browser, which is crazy and super cool. So we really appreciate Adafruit, and yeah, I want to work with them someday. They're great. And then I think this is the very last thing. Oh yes, attackers can remotely disable Fortress Home Wi-Fi security alarms. Whenever we use IoT devices for security, we always get into these issues. The note, a poorly named product, it turns out, is perhaps an accurate assessment. But yeah, the fact that you can remotely disable these is obviously a very bad thing, and it's one of the reasons why we see IoT products get in trouble all the time. I don't know if this was related to that Bluetooth thing where, you know, attackers can crash an IoT device that uses Bluetooth, but it very well could be. So if you use one of these IoT devices to secure your home, then perhaps layers of security might be your best friend until we figure out exactly what's going on with this particular attack against these home security alarms. And that's all the time we have for this week. I want to thank Zam in particular again for bringing a lot of these stories to our attention. His outrage in particular over the Autodesk one I think resonates very well with a lot of users. So I'm glad we included that. And if you feel like we missed anything, or if you have any questions from this stream, make sure to leave them on the YouTube channel so we can answer them during the Q&A next week. All right, I think that's all we have time for. Thank you to everyone in the stream, and we'll see you next time. Bye.